Across the UK, around 170,000 people a year go to hospital due to self-inflicted injuries. That's only the tip of the iceberg, as the majority of people who self-harm don't seek any medical attention due to fear, stigma and confusion. So what drives someone to resort to self-harm? What are the risks, and what can we do about it? Laura is 27 and has been self-harming for around 14 years. She now shares her story to help educate people about self-harm.
I just felt so alone and confused, and I didn't really understand why. I couldn't understand the thoughts that were going through my head. It was like I had that much things going through my head that I didn't know what I was thinking about. And I was just playing with a paperclip one day, and I'd opened it all up and scratched myself, and it felt good, so I continued scratching myself. But they were just scratches at school. They weren't like anything deeper than that.
Laura's story is I found it really interesting because it kind of incorporated really a lot of different features that were kind of found on their own in some of the stories of the 12 people I spoke to. Starting self-harm by kind of experimenting and kind of, using things like paper clips or compasses in school. That was quite a common kind of way that people just talked about, how they started self-harming, and it was often, they were quite clear that they certainly didn't copy anybody else, and this was something that they were just sort of, experimenting with, and like Laura kind of discovered that it felt kind of quite good or made them feel better. So that was quite similar.
No, it helps me a lot of ways because I don't always do it for the same reason all the time. It's like sometimes I'll do it just to make sure that to remind myself that I am in control of my life and other people aren't in control of it. And then other times I'll do it because I feel that dead inside, that I just need to make sure that I am still alive. And other times I do it for something just to look after, and so I do it for many different reasons really. There's no one specific reason.
I mean, the general kind of common theme in terms of what self-harm did for people was that it helped them to manage their emotions. And again, this sort of reflects a lot of what Laura says in that, she said that she used self-harm for different reasons at different times. And again, that's really very much reflected in the stories about the people that I spoke to. So for some people, it was very much about kind of managing escalating tension, and it was a way of kind of relieving tension or tension release. For other people, again, like Laura, it was a way of creating a feeling when they were feeling otherwise kind of nothing and empty. And that was often quite a lot to do with expectations of what people around them expected them to be upset about something or to have feelings about something, and they felt sort of disconnected and that they weren't feeling the things they should feel. And so self-harm was then a way of feeling something, because it was, even if it was painful, it was better than nothing.
It's easier to deal with physical pain than it is to deal with emotional pain. Emotional pain you can see, it's not tangible, and people find it very difficult. Whereas if you have something to focus on, it distracts you from the internal pain.
In some ways it might be helpful to think about self-harm like cutting or burning or even overdosing as maybe not that far away from a lot of other things that people do that are self-harming and that they do for similar reasons. So things like smoking or drinking or taking risks or driving fast and things like that. Some people might do those for very similar reasons, like managing their emotions, dealing with stress, and so on.
So I think that we all self-harm to some extent, every one of us. But some people obviously do it in a more, one is less socially acceptable to cut yourself than to drink a bottle of wine. And two, some people will admit that they are self-harming by overworking, and some people won't see it like that.
It's difficult to know sometimes because of the way that the research evidence is collected. But I think the bottom line is really that anybody could be affected by self-harm.
A common myth is that self-harm is attention-seeking behaviour. In reality, much of it is hidden and goes untreated as a result.
I didn't actually seek help till I was 17. The night before I actually went to the doctors, one of my friends had seen blood on my jumper and managed to get a glimpse of the self-harming, so she actually went and told my mum. But I'd started experiencing suicidal thoughts by then, so that's what made me actually go to the doctors. It wasn't the self-harm itself, it was more the suicidal thoughts that made me go and seek help for the doctor.
I found out Laura was self-harming through one of her friends come to the door one night because Laura was bleeding and drunk, and her friend got a fright because the blood was actually pouring down her hand. That was how I found it. And I think Laura had been self-harming, I think it was 2 years. I'm sure it was 2 years before I found it. It was difficult to believe at first, because that's the only stuff you read about. It doesn't happen to you.
When I was younger, it was like the only thing you really knew about self-harm or people for the psychiatric ward was they were loonies and all the bad things that you got told about. I never actually got told anything about self-harm. I didn't know anybody that self-harmed, so I just felt like ashamed and felt like it was something I had to hide, because I knew I would get bullied at school if it ever got out to any of my friends or that. And I didn't understand why I was doing it in the first place, so I didn't know how I would start explaining it to anybody.
So some people had kind of sought help from their GP quite soon after they first self-harmed, because they were so kind of worried about what they'd done and scared about it really, and wanted kind of reassurance really, I think, that they weren't crazy. Other people kind of self-harmed for quite a long time before seeking help, because they were worried that it wouldn't be taken seriously or whether they even needed help. And some people kind of had, quite negative experiences when they did try and seek help, in that it wasn't taken seriously, and so that kind of put them off seeking help again in the future. The literature is very clear that self-harm is often very private, and in many senses it is, but actually also it's often, not that it's necessarily private, it's just not discussed and not talked about.
Many people who self-harm never experience thoughts of death. However, for some people, suicide and self-harm may be linked.
I think I was about 19 or 20 at the time, and I took 50 anti-abuse tablets and 2 bottles of Buckfast, and I should have died 10 minutes before the ambulance got there, and it was quite hard going when I woke up and obviously seen everybody that loved me and cared about me at the hospital in a mess, and I just felt so bad because I hadn't died at the time, because I really obviously wanted to, or I wouldn't have done it. Well, most of the time I hurt myself to prevent myself from trying to commit suicide, and so it's like a coping mechanism for me for suicide. So when I do hurt myself, then I know I'm not going to die for cutting myself or burning myself or whatever I choose to do.
The story that Laura tells covers many of the aspects of self-harming behaviour. She talks about how it is paradoxical, it would be to many people, she sees it as a way of trying to save her life. So it's something that helps preserve her rather than is likely to cause her death. She talks about it as a way of trying to keep control over things in her life that she feels is out of control. She talks about it as a way of trying to feel something, make some connection with her body. All these are themes that you find in how other people talk about self-harm. The surprising thing is how she distinguishes between self-harm and suicide. In many ways, self-harming protects her from suicidal thoughts. And she describes vividly one time seriously attempting to take her life and being saved by a whisker, really. And in her own mind, she's clear that there are some things she does, or at least on one occasion, which have been about killing herself. And at other times, she's been doing things which are really about many other things, but they're not about killing herself. And that, to me, illustrates some of the key issues in trying to understand self-harm and the link between self-harm and suicide risk.
There is a lot of stigma attached to self-harm, partially because people associate self-harm and suicide as the same thing, And there is a lot of fear, because if you don't do something and you don't make people stop, they might go on and complete suicide.
I would start from the position that you have to look at anybody who's self-harming, and you have to ask yourself and ask them, what's the meaning of this behaviour? Why are you doing it? And did you or do you want to kill yourself? Or did you have thoughts of death? And in some cases, the behaviour may be accompanied by thoughts of death or thoughts of dying, and in other cases not. And Laura illustrates the point that the same individual may, on some occasions, engage in self-harm, which aren't intended to end in death, and on other occasions may engage in self-harm, which are clearly meant to end in death. So, you know, all those kind of assumptions about what the behaviour means are extremely dangerous, and people, particularly those in caring situations, need to ask the right questions to make sure they really understand what's going on.
With the exception of ingesting substances, a harm reduction approach may be adopted to minimise the risk of permanent or lethal damage.
Harm minimisation is something that's relatively new in the world of self-harm. We had NICE guidelines published in 2011 which acknowledged that we could work within a harm minimisation framework. And by that we mean ways of looking at reducing the destruction potentially that self-harm does to an individual, either psychologically or through actual physiological damage. And by that, what we mean is that somebody may still continue to self-harm whilst we're working with them. We would hopefully try and incorporate other ways of coping or looking at the underlying reasons why somebody self-harms, but it's an acknowledgement that they may need to self-harm during that process, and that we're not there to remove that in a paternalistic fashion or make a judgment about that. That's their chosen way of coping at that time.
I'm quite big on safe self-harm, because if you know how to do it safely and things like that, then why should you not be allowed to do it? Why should people be trying to stop you from doing it? Because it's your body and you should be able to do exactly what you want to your own body, as long as you're doing it safely, you're not endangering anybody else, or you're not putting anybody else in an awkward situation like doing it in front of them or whatever. So to me, as long as you're doing it safe behind your own closed doors, then I don't really see why it should bother anybody.
This is about harm minimisation. They're going to do it. Do you try and ban it? If you do, then you run the risk that it'll end up in a tragedy that's even worse than the self-harm, because it's not controlled in any way. Or do you help people do it safely? And this is a major debate. And I think for many people working in residential accommodation, they would see it as being a harm minimisation policy, but it's very hard to get across to the general public that this might be something that's in people's best interest. So it's very controversial.
So at the moment I would say harm minimisation is about basic techniques, things like wound care, anatomy, but also thinking about how relationships can be harmful to people as well, and minimising the damage that we can do through relationships and encounters with people.
Just if she is going to cut herself, just make sure she's got something that's clean and she knows how to take care of her cuts as well, or if they may be a bit too bad, I'll do it for her. But she actually still hides it from me when she's been doing it. But she does look after herself because she's never had infections or nothing through it. But I'm with her 100%, I'm behind her, and I'm not happy, but the safer she can do it, the better.
Well, now I've got a better understanding of myself and my illness, and I think in the last year or so I've grown as a person as well, and I'm starting to find out who I am and where I'm meant to be. And now I believe that I had to go through all the hard stuff that I went through to get to where I am now.
So for me, the breakthrough with Laura was to just be there when she had nothing to say, and listen to her when she wasn't able to articulate how she was feeling or what she wanted to say or what was her story. So we were walking along the coast picking up stones, and she didn't even realize that she was actually talking and disclosing to me.
Well, I ended up knowing that I could trust Maria because she had put up with me not talking to her and not even giving her eye contact for the first year of working with her. But I just had to make sure she wasn't going to run away and leave me like everybody else had done in the past and abandon me as such. So after the year, I reckoned that she had passed every test I'd set her, so I decided maybe it was time to open up to her. And I vaguely remember that we were walking down South Queensferry at the time, and that's where I first ever picked up my first stone. And that's where kind of my stone collecting came from as well. So that's how that became a coping mechanism for me as well later on.
I think what can help people most if they're somebody who self-harms is having a contact with somebody who accepts them, that isn't there to judge them. And that contact might be 10 minutes or it could be across years. I've worked with one person since the day I qualified as a nurse, which is many, many years now. And she's still in contact with me, and she's still developing in her relationship with me as my relationship with her continues to develop.
She made me realise that I did want to finally get help, and I did want to start understanding about my illness, because for all the years I'd just been told that I had this mental illness, but nobody actually told me what it was or anything like that. So when I was in hospital, I was engaging in everything that they offered to me. I was going to groups and I was trying different things because I was wanting the help and I was wanting to try and understand. And I think at that point I'd grew up a lot as well, and I'd matured a bit more, and I didn't have this view of being a loony anymore, and understand more about mental health and mental illness now, and I just wanted to understand a bit better about my own. So what's further over there?
Everybody has got the skills to work with people who self-harm. It's about connecting with people at a human level. We all have to have boundaries, of course we do, but it's about maybe, for example, to do a little bit of disclosure about, you have a dog or you have a husband. It's about connecting with this person and forgetting whatever the story is of that person. It's about being honest with the person and acknowledging it. I think that a lot of the time we try to be perfect, and we are not perfect, and that shows, and that creates a lot of insecurity for people, because they can pick up our facial expressions, but they don't know what we mean by them. So it's very important that we are genuine and honest with people. And I think that if we acknowledge that everybody knows somebody who's been affected by self-harm, we can start the conversation about how to help people who are affected by it.
When I do the training with Maria as well, when I help deliver the training, I'm constantly finding out something new about myself as well, and I'm constantly learning about myself and understanding myself a bit better and growing as a person. And I believe that if you've got too many workers that aren't communicating with each other, then you're at risk of never moving forward. You're always going to be stuck. So it's important for me to keep moving forward rather than backwards.
I was a bit apprehensive at first because I didn't think Laura had come far enough ahead to help other people, but the training has been the making of her. Laura has totally changed. She's grew up so much in the last year that she's unrecognisable sometimes. And just the confidence that she's got in herself. Laura used to shy away from everybody, but now, no, Laura walks tall, and that's the way my daughter should be.